Hello, my name is Sandy Johnston, and I'm the host of the Tiaras Tears and Triumphs podcast. I have put together a special episode of the podcast this week just to tell you a bit more about who this podcast is for, because it's not actually spelt out in the title. So a lot of people absolutely love the title of this podcast, but it doesn't necessarily say who the podcast is for. So the reason that I'm doing this, and I'm putting a pause on my latest series, and that latest series just featured the focus is on the principles taught by the granddaddy of personal development. His name's Napoleon Hill, if you haven't heard of him. And these principles are taken from his book, Think and Grow Rich. But the reason that I'm putting a pause on that, which is a great series to really delve into a way to become empowered, to make yourself rich in areas of your life, whatever they might be, wherever you hold value in your life and want to create more abundance in your life. But pause, I'm just stopping here for a minute and I will get back to that series. But something absolutely amazing happened to this podcast, where Samsung Podcasts decided to feature an episode of this podcast, episode 108, which is Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life. And because they featured that, and they featured it in the UK, and just from featuring it in the UK, I had 35,000 downloads on this podcast in a single week, which is absolutely amazing. And so I just had a whole bunch of new listeners coming to the podcast who have never heard of this podcast before. And so I thought it was a really good opportunity for me to actually go over who this podcast is for, and more importantly, how it can help you, because ultimately that's what this podcast is here for. So before I get started on today's episode, that's going to give you this information to help you know about how this podcast can possibly help you, not only to tap into the support that you need with the challenges that you face, but also to help you to change the trajectory of your life. So that is going to help you to turn that corner and start moving forward in a direction of the type of life that you've always dreamed about living. So as a podcaster, having a podcast app choose to feature, your podcast is an absolute golden opportunity. And I wanted to make the most of this golden opportunity to allow these new listeners to get more of a feel about who I am speaking to and how I can possibly help you. So, my podcast relies, very heavily on organic marketing for people to find it. And so I was very, very fortunate that the people at Samsung saw merit in what I was doing with the podcast and decided to feature it. Without that kind of support, it is very hit and miss for people to find this podcast. And there are so many podcasts out there vying for people's time and attention. So before I say anything else, I just want to say a really heartfelt thank you to Samsung Podcasts for seeing that merit in the work that I'm doing on the podcast and the people that I'm trying to support and help. So thank you, Samsung Podcasts. Big shout out to you. And this podcast has been going for almost 2 years, and it's taken me on my own transformational journey. So the first episode, which was created back in about August of 2020, I've changed since then. The podcast has evolved since then. So this episode is going to bring everything up to date, bring it up to speed. And it's a great place for a new listener to this podcast to start. So I'm the type of person where I like to keep my feet on the ground. I like to be grounded, but at the same time, I like to have my head up in the clouds. I'm a dreamer as well. So that means that you're going to get a mix of really practical strategies combined with some spiritual principles that are contained in this podcast. And I come to you as someone who is a survivor of a toxic relationship, that relationship got so out of control that I had to go into hiding 5 times, and I had to go through 2 major relocations and 2 name changes. And all of that was done in an effort just to keep myself and my children safe from one destructive person. It's amazing how one person can turn your life completely upside down. That was my experience. And I know I'm not alone. I know there are many other women, many other men too, who experience this kind of absolute disruption to their lives and the destruction within their lives. So I come to you as a person of lived experience. And what I share on this podcast comes from that lived experience of me literally picking up the pieces of my life and starting to piece my life back together again in a way where I feel more whole. I can say this, with absolute certainty that I feel more whole now than I have ever felt before in my life, which is a really big claim to say that, but it's absolutely true. I feel like a whole person again, which is an absolutely liberating place to live. So I'm going to share a story about something that happened to me too in that week leading up to my podcast getting this, big amount of attention. More attention than it has received in the almost 2 years since I started. So if you believe in the power of the law of attraction, and if you believe that it is possible to manifest things that you desire through the law of attraction, then you're going to relate to what happened to me. You'll relate really, really easily. And if you don't believe, if you're a bit of a doubting Thomas with the whole law of attraction thing, then you might want to just suspend that belief for a minute and listen to what happened to me, because it might just get you thinking that maybe this whole law of attraction thing, maybe there's something to it, and maybe I should find out a bit more about it. Because when you're using the law of attraction in the right way, it can have some amazing positive flow-on effects in your life that are really transformational. So those doubting Thomases, but you might call what happened to me just coincidence, but I believe it was like the universe was confirming that the powers that be, that they received my order, so to speak, that the heartfelt desire that was that I had for this podcast to reach you. And that is like a confirmation, I guess, of my order being processed. And it was evidence to me that I should keep an eye out for the delivery, because the delivery was on its way. So I'll go into more detail about what happened in the podcast episode. So whether you're new to the show or you've been with me on this journey for a while now, I'm going to take some time to talk to you about who this podcast is for, and more importantly, how it can help you. Let's face it, there are tons of podcasts out there in the world, all serving some purpose, all trying to find an audience. And my podcast, I know it's not going to be for everyone, but if you've ever felt like a victim in your life, then this podcast is the podcast for you. And that is because the Tiaras, Tears and Triumphs podcast It's dedicated to helping people who have been hurt by breakdowns in their relationships to recover, to renew and rebuild. This podcast is here to help you get through the tough times and provide you with remedies to help you turn your wounds into your wisdom. So stick with me and let's open the door on this week's episode.